Have you ever wondered how the training looks for one of the best athletes in the world? And what is required for a podium place in Milano-San Remo and a win at Ronde van Vlaanderen? Luckily for you, I have the answers. So in this video, we will discover how no one other than Mathieu van der Poel trains and what is required for you to stand on the podium of a monument. Oh wait, skip the last part, it can be hard. First of all, I can reveal how I got this data and some background of van der Poel's training leading up to the block we will analyze. After grappling with a persistent back injury stemming from the Tour de France, Mathieu van der Poel was forced to cut short his cyclocross season, skip the World Championships, and even halt training entirely after Christmas. This injury was publicly evident after van der Poel's hard crash during the cross-country mountain bike race at the Tokyo Olympics, where he landed heavily on his back. By early January, it was announced that van der Poel would undergo a period of complete rest, staying off the bike until his back pain subsided. After a brief one-month hiatus, Mathieu van der Poel resumed training on January 29th. And to everyone's surprise, he chose to publish all the data on Strava, including heart rate and watts, something that is unusual for someone from the professional world to do. I've made a document over this period with the total amount of hours, sessions, and kilometers. He began with 3 light sessions on Zwift before transitioning to outdoor rides in Belgium. These initial efforts were kept deliberately easy, with average power outputs ranging between 200 and 230 watts. His longest outdoor ride during this period was modest in duration, lasting just under 3 hours. As you can see, the correlation power to heart rate is very low, and this is something he will develop a lot in the coming period. His first 2 weeks were very easy, landing at 1 hour 44 minutes and 61.8 kilometers in 2-session respective 8 hours 21 minutes and 267.3 kilometers in 4 sessions, with all sessions at Zone 1 to Zone 2. After a week easing back into training, Mathieu van der Poel traveled to Alicante, Spain, likely replicating the training camp he would typically have done with Alpecin Phoenix in January. Once there, he quickly increased the duration of his rides and, after a few days, began incorporating efforts into his sessions. The mountainous, a typical day would be 4 to 5 hours endurance with high Zone 2 power in the mountains, around 270 to 290 watts. The exact status of van der Poel's back injury during this period remains unclear, but it seems unlikely that 3 weeks off the bike in January resolved the issue entirely. His training data suggests that both he and his coach, Christophe de Kegel, were cautious to avoid aggravating the injury. Notably, van der Poel avoided sprint efforts throughout the training block. Despite this precaution, van der Poel introduced some intensity shortly after arriving in Alicante. His coach prescribed sessions such as short over-under intervals and regular 15-minute threshold tests. A typical one could be 24 minutes over/unders, with the over ones at 420 watts and unders at 260 watts, or harder 5-minute blocks at 530 watts for 30 SEK and 270 for 30 SEK. One thing that's interesting is that he keeps the cadence pretty low for each of these intervals. 60 RPM at the harder threshold ones, at 80 at the VO 2. After roughly a month of training, van der Poel tested himself on the well-known Col de Rate segment. He recorded 389 watts over 1535 at an average heart rate of 177 BPM, equating to approximately 5.19 W/kg if his weight was 75 kilograms, as listed on Strava. It is hard to say if this was an all-out effort, but for sure he pushed. Van der Poel's test on February 26th came after just 12 structured training rides since returning to activity, so it was unsurprising that his performance fell short of his peak capabilities. However, the following day offered a more promising sign. During a VO2 max test at the end of a long ride, van der Poel produced 449 watts, 5.99 W/kg, for just under 8 minutes. This result was particularly encouraging, as it reflected van der Poel's ability to generate power under fatigue, a critical factor for success in the demanding races and classics he targets. In March, Mathieu van der Poel significantly increased his training load and saw remarkable gains in power across various test durations. On the very first ride of Team Month, just 3 days after his 15-minute test at the end of February, he performed 3 efforts at higher power and longer durations than his previous test. During his second effort, which lasted just over 15 minutes, he averaged 10 watts more while maintaining a heart rate 10 BPM lower than 3 days earlier. To cap off the ride, He completed another VO2 max test, this time producing 20 watts more than before. Van der Poel appeared pleased with his progress, captioning the ride, "Finally some good legs." The following week maintained a similar structure, with long rides and over-under intervals. However, the intensity of the overs was increased to 450 to 460 watts, up from 420 watts earlier. On March 12th, Van der Poel achieved an impressive 15-minute test on the Col à la Pour Castells climb, producing 469 watts over 1435, 6.25 W/kg. He maintained 460 watts for the first 1331 and finished with a powerful S to simulate a race scenario. This performance highlights his extraordinary progress in just a few weeks. To put it into perspective, at the end of February, he produced 389 watts for 1535, 5.19 W/kg on the Col de Rates. 2 weeks later, he improved by an additional 1 W/kg with a lower heart rate and irregular pacing, an astounding leap in fitness. Van der Poel's heart rate at a given power also dropped significantly during Alicante training block, a key indicator of improved efficiency. Even as his RID became longer and more intense toward the end of the camp, with multiple efforts per session, his average heart rate remained steady. The general idea during this training camp was to get the hours in, with 3 hard weeks and 1 rest week. And the training philosophy was a lot of hours at endurance, with high zone 2 in the mountains and short squeeze efforts above threshold, often over /unders or 30/30ths. No intervals at specific threshold. Now that we have covered the training camp, can we take a look at how he prepared for his win in Ronde van Vlaanderen and his 3rd place in Milano-San Remo? When he returned to Belgium, it was only 6 days left to Milano-San Remo. During these days, he did 2 short endurance rides with 2 and 4 hours. The next day, he did 2 hours of motor pacing and a 20-minute block of overs and unders, where he did 1 minute at or short above threshold 420 to 440 watts, and 1 minute under 320 to 340 watts. Then he did a short 90-minute ride the day before with no specific efforts, which W interesting to see. And the next day, he managed to make a great performance and finish 3rd in Milano-San Remo. From here, it was 2 weeks until Ronde van Vlaanderen. The following week, he did the stage race Coppi e Bartali in Italy, where he got a solid 25-hour week in the leg. During his pre-race week, he included Dwars door Vlaanderen, where he managed to win. The following days were short and easy rides before the big monument, Ronde van Vlaanderen, where he claimed an impressive victory with, in my opinion, pretty solid numbers, but more of that in another video. Mathieu van der Poel's training journey clearly demonstrates the demands of competing at the highest level in the world's toughest races and the resilience required to overcome setbacks like injuries. That was everything I had to say in this video. I hope you find it interesting. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on what you want to see in the next video. Take care of you. All the best from Prime Cycling.